What's up, guys? It's Doodoo Poker back here for a theory video this time. And we are going to be talking about deep stack poker and how we can exploit our opponents based on what they do on the flop and turn. So here's the hand in question. I posted this hand on 2+2. I'm going to go over it real quick. The under the gun player opens. We 3-bet with queen of spades, jack of spades in the cutoff, and under the gun calls. Everyone else folds. The flop comes ace 9-7 with 3 diamonds. We c-bet about 33% pot. Villain calls on the turn, 4 clubs. We c-bet around 75% pot. Villain calls, river, 6 of diamonds. Under the gun checks, and we bet 75% pot. All right, so I'm going to go over this hand and drive HUD first, and then we'll dive into the concepts. Here we go. We're around 148 big blinds deep. This is the hand. Here we go. Ace 9-7, 3 diamonds, check, we bet, call, 4 clubs in the turn, check, we bet again, call, river, diamond, we bet, he folds. All right, so this is a solver approved line. But there's actually a ton of concepts that can be extrapolated from this hand. So I'm going to go into the solver. And the first thing we want to go over is that our preferred sizing on this board is 33%. The EV difference is small between a 33% and 50%, but it's slightly higher EV to bet smaller. Let's look at the equities on this board. So I'm going to add this to database. We have a huge equity advantage here. If you look at under the gun calling range, his equity is only around 40%, and we have almost 60% equity, which is actually really big. You won't find that many equity discrepancies on many boards outside of like Ace King X boards. You're very rarely going to have a 60% equity advantage on the flop. So that's the first thing. So we have an overall equity advantage. Now, I'm going to go into Villain's reaction to our small 3-bet, or our small c-bet. He should be check raising 13.4% of the time. As we can see, he does it with some flop flushes, he does it with some sets, and he does it with some weaker top pair. So let's go over some assumptions that I think are reasonable. Do we think that Villain will check raise a hand like King Queen of Diamonds on the flop? See, on the solver says that we should be calling around 45% of the time and check raising around 5% of the time. That's because about 50% of the time we should be 4-betting. So do we really think that an unknown is going to be calling the majority of the time with King Queen suited? Probably not. And the same thing with King 10 suited, and the same thing with King Jack suited. You think they're going to mostly be calling the flop? No, they're probably going to be raising. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if we node lock all the king high flushes to check raise either the flop or the turn, then when we get to the river, let's look at this for a second. Let's look at this reasonable assumption. So we bet the flop, right? We 3-bet pre-flop, the flop comes, we bet small. Do we think Niels is going to be check raising the flop with King Queen of Diamonds, King Jack of Diamonds, and King 10 of Diamonds? I would say there's a reasonable chance that he would check raise the flop, right? Okay, so that's one assumption. Okay, now we get to the turn. Now I bet 75% pot on a 4 clubs turn. Do we think Niels is going to be check raising the flop flushes at almost 100% frequency? I contend yes. Because not only did we show strength on the flop, now we're betting pretty big, and he wants to get money into the pot, right? Here's the problem with that strategy. If we go to, just disregard the donk leads, but if we go here, look at, this is at 100 big blinds deep, but look at how the solver reacts to a 75% size bet. It never check raises. Why is that? Well, the whole point of solvers is that it can't be exploited, right? So the solver realizes that if we start check raising king, queen of diamonds, king, jack of diamonds, queen, jack of diamonds, queen, 10 of diamonds, look, it never check raises. If we start check raising all those hands on either the flop or on the turn, we never have the nuts on the river, on a diamond river. That is hugely important. So if we start check raising king, queen of diamonds, king, jack of diamonds, king, 10 of diamonds on the flop and or the turn, we will never have the nuts on a diamond river. And I contend that 99% of the population will check raise the flop flush either on the flop or the turn, especially versus big sizing. So how do we extrapolate that? Well, that means that we can, on a diamond river, this is the actual solution to the hand. Queen, jack of spades, bluffs about 50% of the time. But I think we can do a lot better than the solver solution. We can overbluff this river on a diamond because our opponent doesn't know that he will have 0 nut hands on a diamond river, because he will always check raise king, queen of diamonds, king, jack of diamonds, and king, 10 of diamonds onto the flop or the turn. So how does this relate to deep stack poker, which is what this video is about? Okay, well, I did a solution at 300 big blinds deep, and I'm going to show you what happened. I node locked. These are my assumptions. These are my reasonable assumptions from our opponent. This is the queen jack hand. These are my assumptions for the opponent. He always 4-bets ace king off pre-flop, okay? So that means he will never have ace x king of diamonds. That's a reasonable assumption, because players don't understand that you should almost never be 4-betting ace king off pre-flop when you're 300 big blinds deep. Under the gun versus cutoff 3-bet. It's almost always a call. He will always 4-bet kings. Again, another reasonable assumption. That means he will never have king of diamonds, king x. He always check raises the flop nut flush, which is king queen, king jack, king 10, on either the flop or the turn. He folds king queen off pre-flop. That means he can never have king of diamonds, queen x. I think those are 4 reasonable assumptions. And if all these assumptions are true, our opponent will never have the king of diamonds on a diamond river. So we can exploit him by shoving all in, no matter how deep we are, because he'll never have the nuts. So let's look at this. I ran a solve where we are 300 big blinds deep, and I c-bet 1/3 on the flop. I node locked so that our opponent will always either check raise the flop or the turn with king, queen, king, jack, or king 10. And I made 0% donking range. So I bet 33% on the flop, I bet 50% on the turn. When we get to the river, these are the sizings: 100% pot, 2x pot, 3x pot, 4x pot, 5x pot. Look at how the solver reacts. The solver will always shove all in because our opponent can never have the nuts. That means we should be shoving all our bluffs. This is how you exploit people in deep stack poker. If people don't understand that you should have some nut combos on this river, then we can extrapolate that and exploit them by always shoving all our bluffs on a river, no matter how deep we are. So I'm going to go over some basic deep stack concepts, and we can kind of tie this all together. So The stack to pot ratio in this 300 BB hand, the stack to pot ratio is around 18. But the stack to pot ratio is what matters in deep stack poker, not any concept, any vague concept. So, for instance, you could be 1,000 big blinds deep, but if you get 500 big blinds in pre-flop, you're not deep stack. The post-flop SPR is what matters. That's what deep stack is. Now, since this is a 3-bet pot, the SPR is going to be obviously lower because there's more money in pre-flop. But once the SPR gets to around 10 or higher in a 3-bet pot, that is considered deep stack. Because if we look here at the 200 big blinds, the SPR is around 12. So for convenience purposes, we'll say that deep stack is any effective stack pre-flop at 200 big blinds, and the SPR has to be at least 10 or higher in a 3-bet pot. So the higher the stack to pot ratio, the higher the frequency the in-position player will c-bet. So in these solutions, in this solution here, we'll notice this is at 100 BBs effective, that we should be c-betting 81.8% of the time, right? Okay, if we look at the 200 BB solution, that's around 90%. And then when we go up to the 300 BB solution, that's 98%. So your c-bet frequency goes up in position. Conversely, the higher the SPR, the lower the frequency the out of position player will check raise. So here we have the out of position player, which is under the gun, check raising at 13.4%. When we go to 200 big blinds, it's only 8%. And then when we go to 300 big blinds, it's around 5%. So check raises go down, c-bet frequency goes up. And equities do not change when stacks are deeper, but expected value does. So your value as the in-position player will naturally go up when the SPR is higher. And when you're the out-of-position player, your EV naturally goes down when the SPR is higher. So most people don't know this, but your pre-flop ranges should change when stacks get deeper. That's what I was talking about with ace-king here. So if you're like 400 or 300 big blinds deep, and you have ace-king off, and you're in the under the gun, and cutoff 3-bets you should almost always be calling. This is one of the manifestations of not calling. If you always 4-bet your ace-king when you're deep stack, that's a leak. So suited aces and pocket pairs go up in value, and offsuit high cards, like we were just talking about, like ace-king and ace-queen, go down in value. Because we want hands that can make nut holdings, not one-pair hands. So if you ever think about the biggest pots you've ever won, usually they're not with one-pair hands. Usually they're with, flushes, straights, sets. Ace-king usually makes a good one-pair hand, top pair, top kicker, when it flops well. But top pair, top kicker can't comfortably get in 400 big blinds deep. Whereas a hand like a suited ace can flop a nut flush draw. It can also cooler lower flushes. And then a hand like a pocket pair can flop a set, etc. So we're going to go back to this queen jack hand. Like I said, there's reasonable assumptions I'm putting for my opponent. If he always 4-bets ace-king off, I think that's reasonable. If he always 4-bets kings, I think, again, that's reasonable. If he always check raises the nut flush, I think that's reasonable on either the flop or the turn. And if he folds king-queen off pre-flop. If all these assumptions are true, our opponent will never have the king of diamonds on a diamond river. So we can exploit him by shoving all in, no matter how deep we are. We can see this right here in our 5x pot shove at 300 big blinds deep. The solver realizes that we can get exploited on diamond rivers, which is why it never check raises a king of queen of diamonds, king jack of diamonds, or king 10 of diamonds. Because the whole goal of a solver is to not be exploited. So we can use our knowledge of how population plays And we know that they're not disciplined enough to, one, not check raise the flop, and then two, not check raise the turn, because they want to get the money in. So we can exploit their lack of discipline on the river by over bluffing diamond rivers. And as we see in this hand, this is exactly what I did. We'll go back from the beginning. Niels opens, I 3-bet pre-flop, he calls, check, bet small, bet on the turn, 75%. I should have shipped this river, that was a slight sizing mistake. But I did recognize that he almost never had a king of diamonds. So I should have shipped all in, but I bet 75%, and he folds. Well, I hope you guys learned something, and this is just a short little primer on deep stack theory. And I hope I see you guys at the tables.